Hello and welcome to how I painted this. Now I painted this for a competition online. I've never entered one before. I thought I'd give it a go. What's the worst that's going to happen? Now the competition is to print this little miniature, paint it and, well, enter it really into a competition. Now I'm fairly sure I'm not going to win the competition, but I ain't going to get anywhere close unless I try. I think this is a good way for me to try and improve my skills and push myself in my little painting techniques. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching and have fun! Now, after printing, cleaning and priming the model, I decided to paint the areas on the model that aren't part of the figure black, in the hope that they won't be visible when the model's finished. For the areas that I deem organic on the figure, like the face, the skin, and tail, I'll be using the shade, base and highlight method. To start out, I blocked out all the areas on the figure with the shadow tones to get a general idea of what the model would look like and give it a starting point. I did look at lots of reference photos and was drawn to the idea of having a green skin body with blue highlights with a paler yellowy sort of underside. I find this a better way of painting by blocking out all the colours, as it's easier to correct colour clashes at the beginning rather than trying to fix it 5 hours in. I've tried fixing paint jobs in the past and chasing a problem only makes the result worse and worse. Now, after realising it's impossible to hold the model and paint at the same time, I glued it to a cork. The areas on the model that were made from materials were going to be painted with a base colour followed by a wash and then some highlights. As whites, greys, blacks and browns are neutral colours, they would be perfect for all the materials as they won't clash with the actual colour of the figure. If this figure was for a board game, applying a wash over it and varnishing it would complete this little project. I, however, wanted to punish myself. For the next stage of painting, it's time to apply the base colour. This is applied on approximately 3/4 of all of the darker colours, whilst also focusing on painting the areas that would receive more light. As you can see, there are scales everywhere, so this is a really fun task. Unfortunately, using this technique does create a hard edge between the lighter and darker colours. To fix this, you can use water, but I like to use glaze medium. After mixing the paint with the glaze medium and wicking off the excess liquid, it's time to paint the areas between the light and the dark areas. This might take multiple coats, but it helps to soften the transition between the two colours. For his little blue bumpy things, painting half moons on the top of the bumps helps give them that little bit more depth. This was then repeated on all the yellowy skin areas as well. As you can see, the little figure's starting to fill out and stop looking completely flat. Again, a wash and a varnish would make a pretty good looking mini. But with all those scales, why stop there? With the lightest paint, it's time to paint all the highlights. With the highlights, it's best to use it sparingly, so I only cover a very small part of each little scale. I also place a tiny dot on each little lumpy bump he has, and apply a very thin highlight on the outermost part of all of his little wrinkles. For his armour and clothing, weapons and the like, it's time to crack open the trusty pot of skill. This is applied all over the areas that aren't part of his body. And for the areas that touch the body, like the edge of his little armbands, I make sure a very small amount of the shade medium flows into the creases between his bandages and his arm to help create extra shadows and help separate the clothing from his body. For the leather effect on the belt and sword holder, I find painting orange on all the edges, as well as creating thin little lines, creates a simple leather effect. For all the metallic areas, I reapplied the metallics across all the edges. And to punish myself again, I highlighted all the cords on his little strings and ropes. I also did edge highlighting on his crossbow, using a lighter brown. For his horns, I tried reapplying the original colour, but it was far too bright and stood out too much. So I applied a tiny amount of black to the off-white to make it more off-white. And remember, keep in mind your finger is also a tool for painting. As I'm not really fond of doing eyes, I figured I could cheat with the lizard. I used a nice blue ink and let it pool inside of the eye socket. I followed this up by using a bright white and applied 2 highlights to the back and front of the eyeball.
This lizard doesn't have pupils, so I can't screw the eye up if I try any more. The wire on the crossbow was scratch built by me, so when I accidentally dropped a cocktail stick near the model, I realised I could scratch build an arrow as well. It's just a simple process of filing it down until you get the right shape and width. Also, being that the cocktail stick is made out of wood, I could simply use some burnt umber ink that I watered down and apply it to the cocktail stick, knowing that I'd stain it underneath. As this will dry irregularly, it will create very small shadows and highlights, making it a very quick scratch built arrow shaft. I then painted the arrowhead using a silver paint, applying the wash on it afterwards, and then painstakingly paint little silver highlights on it. When doing this in real life, that cocktail stick pinged quicker than I could see. I eventually found it stuck to my mouse by my computer. As it had semi-dried onto my mouse, I repainted all the highlights, applied a small amount of PVA glue inside the crossbow arrow holdingy thing, and ever so not gently squeezed the cocktail stick into the gap. When applying the glue, some of you eagle-eyed people might have noticed something. The wire I used to apply the glue into the crossbow was actually a perfect fit and would have made a great arrow. I stupidly also used it as a reference on how yeah, I used it as a template when shaving the cocktail stick down. Now onto the base. If you have children like me, finding alternative bases like ice cream lids on their bedroom floors saves printing new ones. To help create the base, I cut out a cardboard template, then divided the circular cardboard using the rule of thirds to help me compose the final product. This is just where you have to place everything off center. I read it in a book somewhere and it said it makes everything look better, so who am I to argue? After sketching out the idea that was in my head, which does actually help me figure out if it's going to fit on the base, I then cut out several more blanks. These would be used to create extra depth onto the actual base. As I was going to use resin to create a little river on the scene, I had to make sure the deepest part wouldn't be greater than 3mm. This meant I would have to glue 2 cardboard inserts to create the lowest point in this little diorama. Also, to anybody watching, that's PVA glue, you naughty person. Using my original template, I started cutting out smaller and smaller pieces of the terrain, providing the much needed height and depth that's needed on a base. Originally I wanted the water at the front of the model, but in gluing the pieces of cardboard down, it naturally gravitated to the middle. As this happened organically, I'm not going to change it because fate has a way of telling you that's how you're going to do it. To cover the cardboard, I was going to use my mystery mix. It's a mix of polyfiller, PVA, sand, coffee grounds. It, however, crackles because of the PVA. I don't want a cracked earth, so I'm going to use polyfiller just out of the tin. Now, I'm not particularly good at sculpting, so this became a simple task of slapping more and more polyfiller on top of the model until I was reasonably happy with the result. When it came to finally texturing it, I used a nice rounded edge to help smooth out the little channel for the river, making sure I don't press too hard, exposing the cardboard underneath. To create the mud type texture on the upper parts of the base, applying a small amount of polyfiller on the back of the tool and gently dabbing up and down on all the areas you want mud helps pull up the polyfiller from the base, creating little lumps and bumps. And as my wife will confirm, the base is still smoother and more level than some of my repair jobs around the house. To help the model not stand out and look like it's floating when glued on, smushing it into the base now helps create little holes for his feet. As the resin water will seep into any tiny gap or crack in a given surface, I find applying a generous coat of PVA glue onto the area where the resin will sit, as well as the surrounding areas, will help create a nice little watertight seal for the resin to sit in. Every now and then you just have to go back and make sure the PVA glue isn't settling to the bottom by spreading it out with the brush. When the PVA glue starts to get a little tacky and stops flowing freely, placing small stones on the base helps them stick to it. You could also apply sand or any other debris you'd like as well. One thing to note on the base is to keep a keen eye for little bubbles. Make sure to cover them, as this is where the air is escaping from the cracks in the polyfiller. This is where the resin would have flown under the cardboard. Yeah, I've been there and done that. After the base is dried and primed, My visual plan for it was to keep it quite neutral and dark. I wanted most of the focus to be on the figure standing on it, not the actual base itself. This time I decided to use a dry brushing technique, again using a shadow, base and highlight colour system, where I would apply the first layer using a heavy dry brush, followed by a lighter dry brush, and then a very light soft one to finish it off. I also used the original browns that I used on his shirt for the mud effects, as well as the same greens I used for his scaly back to create that slight grassy area between the water and the riverbank. As I'm using the same colours I used on the figure itself, this will help the base blend in and not stand out. For the stones, I was going to paint them in nice stone type colours, but again I thought that they might stand out too much. When I was happy with the general colour tones of the base, making sure I don't just keep going and go overboard, it was time to break out my bags of general vegetation and mixed little bits of string. As I couldn't be bothered to paint them, my plan was to pick out all the darkest pieces, which you can see here. All that's needed is a tiny piece of super glue to attach them to the base. And yep, I nearly drilled holes to put them all in. If you're also doing this, remember to keep all the loose bits of debris. I did want a slight bit of brightness at the back of the base, so I made a mix of static grass that I thought would fit the tone. All you need to stick it is the PVA glue. Remembering that static grass, less is sometimes more. You don't need to cover the whole base to have the same effect. After applying the grass with the scary static shock machine, a simple little bit of touch up is all that's needed for the grass to be completed. As long as you're gentle, you can encourage the grass strands to stick up a little bit more if the static machine doesn't do its job. I'll be using this nice AK puddle effect for the little river, making sure I have all those little bits of debris ready to hand. Making sure that the pot is shaken very well, it's time to just apply it straight to the base from the bottle. This stuff's acrylic, so I'm not too worried about fumes. It's very important to not over apply the product as it flows very easily. So continuously spreading out the liquid before applying more into the dry areas helps prevent it flowing over the edge later down the line. Although it says it's safe to use with a brush, I do like using a very cheap brush to help spread it out. A cocktail stick can also work to break the surface tension between the liquid and the base, stopping it from creating little ridges around the edges. When I was happy with the coverage of the little river, applying the debris as quickly as possible helps it stick to the resin water. Popping all the bubbles in the water was a nightmare, but I found breaking a cocktail stick so it has a sharp edge helped pop them easily. When everything was dry and cured off, it was time to super glue the little lizard man into the holes I created earlier. As you can see, multitasking isn't one of my strong points, so I'll reattach the lid later. And with that, the model is finished and done. All I have to do is pinch my wife's cacti, rearrange them, and take a photo of the little figure in front of them. And as I'm recording this after I submitted the entry for the competition, it's too late for me to change my mind. So what do you think? Do I stand a chance in even coming close to winning? Let me know. Again, thanks for watching and have fun.